Namaste. Aloha, my name is Janapati Das, and welcome to the Bhagavad Gita as it is class, translated and purported upon by our dear spiritual grandfather, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. I'd also like to offer my respectful obeisances to him and to my spiritual master Jagat Guru Siddhaswarapananda Srila Prabhupada, and offer my respects to you. Thank you for tuning in. We have been reading from Karma Yoga Chapter 3, and we are just going to get right into it, and feel free to join along. Namo Siddha Swarupananda Paramahamsa Namine Gora Karuna Swarupaya Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I was born in the darkness, ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. So welcome. We are going to continue with our conversation that is going on between the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, and his disciple and friend, Arjuna. We had left off at text 32, and we'll start again with text 33. Sanskrit. Sadrasham cheshtate svasyaha prakrita gananavan api prakritim adyanti bhutani nikalaha kim karishyati shadarsam. Accordingly, chestate tries svasyaha in one's own nature, prakritye modes, ganavan the learned, api although, prakrityam nature, yanti undergo, bhutani all living entities, nikalaha suppression, kim what, karishyati can do. So we will have these words that kind of come up over and over again in the Bhagavad Gita because they're brought up many times and they're related to, different things. We have, of course, prakriti, this is referred to as modes. It's also, prakriti is also the energy of material energy, can be material energy. Ganavan, the learned, of Gana, of course, is to know and to learn. Prakriti, again, nature. Translation. Even a man of knowledge acts according to his own nature, for everyone follows his nature. What can repression accomplish? So Krishna, of course, is referring to Arjuna's ability to fight, and what can it really benefit to repress his ability to fight. So that's, unless one is situated on the transcendental platform of Krishna consciousness, he cannot get free from the influence of the modes of material nature, as it is confirmed by the Lord in the 7th chapter, chapter 7, verse 14. Therefore, even for the most highly educated person on the mundane plane, it is impossible to get out of the entanglement of Maya simply by theoretical knowledge or by separating the soul from the body. I'm going to jump ahead to read that verse because it wasn't referenced in the purport, but I want to read it. So this is text 14, chapter 7. This divine energy of mind, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome, but those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. There we go. So just like our reference of someone's being a great swimmer but being placed in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean has no chance. Similarly, the living entity has no chance in the material world to get himself out of this situation without the mercy of Krishna, without surrendering their life to Krishna, because you need the person who can get you out of that, and it's not you. Therefore, even for the most highly educated person on the mundane plane, it is impossible to get out of the entanglement of Maya simply by theoretical knowledge or separating the soul from the body. There are so many called spiritualists who outwardly pose to be advanced in the science, but inwardly or privately they are completely under the particular modes of nature which they are unable to surpass. So our TikTok, our social media is full of people that pose themselves as whatever, and they're one day they're guiding you through what they think is a way out of there, and then next week they're posting their spiritual crisis that they're having. Academically, one may be very learned, but because of his long association with material nature, he is in bondage. Nice. Yeah, so there are people who are very academically intelligent, but they are still subjected to the modes of material nature. They're still in this bondage. Krishna consciousness helps one to get out of the material entanglement, even though one may be engaged in his prescribed duties. Therefore, without being fully in Krishna consciousness, no one should suddenly give up his prescribed duties and become a so-called yogi or transcendentalist artificially. It is better to be situated in one's position and to try to attain Krishna consciousness under superior training. So our superior training, of course, is by the pure devotee of Krishna, our spiritual masters, who are our spiritual masters for that very reason, to help guide us and help us to come to this point. Because, just like Arjuna, but more specifically, I can speak from my own experience, but other people have talked about this as well, as just having this sort of chip on your shoulder of thinking like, well, we're really academically intelligent, I've got these many degrees, I have this kind of, like, I've read so many books and so many yogis, I've taken so many workshops or whatever, and therefore I am knowledgeable of this of spiritual understanding. And we are just actually, I've realized, that coming in front of my spiritual master, just how little I actually knew. Thus, one may be freed from the clutches of Maya. Okay, so text 34. Indriyashyendriyasyate raga deveshao yavashtitao tayor na vasham agachat tau yasha paripantinao. Indriyashya, of the senses, indriyashya arte, in the sense objects, raga, attachment, deveshao, also an attachment, vyavashtitao, put under regulations, tayao, of them, na, never, vasham, control, agachyat, one should come, tal, those, he, certainly are, asya, his, paripanthinao, stumbling blocks. Translation. Attraction and repulsion for sense objects are felt by embodied things, but one should not fall under the control of the senses and sense objects because they are stumbling blocks on the path of self-realization. So our senses are perpetually seeking out happiness through its means, and the attraction and repulsion for sense objects are felt by embodied beings. So we've talked about this before too as well. Something seems so very, very attractive, we engage in that sense object, and then we suck the enjoyment out of it, and then we're repulsed by it, want to get rid of it. Or it could be anything. It could be sex, it could be food. There's just an unlimited amount of things that our senses can engage in. Those who are in Krishna consciousness are naturally reluctant to engage in material sense gratifications, but those who are not in such consciousness should follow the rules and regulations of the revealed scriptures. Unrestricted sense enjoyment is the cause of material engagement, but one who follows the rules and regulations of the revealed scriptures does not become entangled by the sense objects. For example, sex enjoyment is necessary for the conditioned soul, and sex enjoyment is allowed under the license of marriage ties. For example, according to scriptural injunctions, one is forbidden to engage in sex relationships with any woman other than one's wife. All other women are to be considered as one's mother. But in spite of such injunctions, a man is still inclined to have sex relationships with other women. These propensities are to be curbed, otherwise they will be stumbling blocks on the path of self-realization. As long as the material body is there, the necessities of the material body are allowed, but under rules and regulations. And yet we should not rely upon the control of such allowances. One has to follow those rules and regulations unattached to them, because practice of sense gratifications under regulations may also lead one to go astray, as much as there is always a chance of an accident, even on the royal roads. So the point being said here is that there are rules and regulations under these kinds of things, but we have to be careful about where our mind is leading us. We might be thinking, yeah, I'm being regulated and whatever, doing this, and this is what the reason why I'm following it, because it says so in the rules and regulations, and then so I just keep doing it. The idea is to regulate with the idea of dovetailing more of our focus onto Krishna activities. So, we have the basic premise of sexual enjoyment is, the reality is if sex wasn't enjoyable, then there would be no living entities to come into the material world and into bodies. There is a reason for that, but because it's so attractive, people want to engage in it for its sake only. So this has become perverted in not just heterosexual, homosexual, and transgender and things, and goes on and on and on, because this enjoyment is never really satisfied, and so it just becomes more and more perverted as people try to seek out even more pleasure from something that is supposed to have a spiritual purpose. Originally it was, if you were to be married, if you're married to a man and a woman get married and they have a spiritual relationship where they serve Krishna together, and if they have children, that's allowed to have children to help bring spirit souls into a Krishna conscious family, to be able to raise them to be Krishna conscious. If it's done in any other reason, then it's sinful. Although they may be very carefully maintained, no one can guarantee that there will be no danger even on the safest road. The sense enjoyment spirit has been current a very long time, owing to material association. Therefore, in spite of regulated sense enjoyment, there is every chance of falling down. Therefore, any attachment for regulated sense enjoyment must also be avoided by all means. But action in the loving service of Krishna detaches one from all kinds of sensory activities. Therefore, no one should try to be detached from Krishna consciousness at any stage of life. The whole purpose of detachment from all kinds of sense attachment is ultimately to become situated on the platform of Krishna consciousness. So this is why we keep our duty of serving our spiritual master very close to our heart, because these things, we know, regardless of whether we're chanting or we're not chanting. If we're not chanting, it's a little bit harder, definitely, but these things will come through our mind, desires, whatnot, to do different kinds of things. We don't have to jump into that river. We don't have to jump into the river and dive down for all the goodies and slime and stuff that is inside the river. We just let it float down, and it passes. And the greatest focus of way to keep our mind attracted is to chant Krishna's names. And this is why initially when somebody comes around to chanting, we don't require there to be expectations of this or that, you should be doing this, you can't be doing that, the rules and regulations or whatever. We just say come and chant. And so the idea is that the chanting is so powerful that it will actually draw the attraction for sense enjoyment away from sense enjoyment to Krishna consciousness. And so that's that's the main point, takeaway on this. Text 35. Shreyan svadharmo vigunaha paradharmat savanuштitahat swadharme nidyanam shreya paradharmo bhayavaha. Shreyan, far better, svadharmaha, one's prescribed duties, viguna, even faulty, paradharmat, from duties mentioned for others, shvanushtitat, then perfectly done, svadharme, in one's prescribed duties, nidyanam, destruction, shreya, better, paradharmaha, duties prescribed for others, bhaya avaha, dangerous. Translation: it is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though they may be faulty, than another's duties. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. Purport: one should therefore discharge his prescribed duties in full Krishna consciousness rather than those prescribed for others. Prescribed duties complement one's psychophysical condition under the spell of the modes of material nature. Spiritual duties are as ordered by the spiritual master for the transcendental service of Krishna, but both materially or spiritually, one should stick to his prescribed duties even up to death rather than imitate another's prescribed duties. Duties on the spiritual platform and duties on the material platform may be different, but the principle of following the authorized direction is always good for the performer. When one is under the spell of the modes of material nature, one should follow the prescribed rules for particular situations and should not imitate others. For example, a Brahmana who is in the mode of goodness is non-violent, whereas a Kshatriya who is in the mode of passion is allowed to be violent. As such, for a Kshatriya it is better to be vanquished following the rules of violence than to imitate a Brahmana who follows the principles of non-violence. Everyone has to cleanse his heart by a gradual process, not abruptly. However, when one transcends the modes of material nature and is fully situated in Krishna consciousness, he can perform anything and everything under the direction of the bona fide spiritual master. In that complete stage of Krishna consciousness, the Kshatriya may act as a Brahmana, or the Brahmana may act as a Kshatriya. In the transcendental stage, the distinction of the material world do not apply. For example, Vishvamrita was originally a Kshatriya, but later on he acted as a Brahmana, whereas Parshurama was a Brahmana, but later he acted as a Kshatriya. Being transcendentally situated, they could do so, but as long as one is on the material platform, he must perform his duties according to the modes of material nature. At the same time, he must have a full sense of Krishna consciousness. So that's a pretty amazing purport, that unless you're transcendentally situated, you're going to be in, we stated this point before, that people are at different places spiritually. Sometimes you present somebody with something that seems so very clear, but because of their consciousness, they're in a particular state. So these last few verses, when we were talking about not disturbing people who are situated in certain modes, but just try to help them engage in some form of devotional service where they can be purified, or whether it's just actually eating prasadam or receiving some of the mantras. It could be a lot of different things. But the main point is that we don't, spiritual life is a gradual process, because we've been in the material world for God knows how long, and we've been racking up the certain kinds of karma. We have a certain kind of consciousness, and I just like to harken back to that idea of the spiritual life being like this great banquet, but you can't stuff your face full of this banquet. You have to kind of gradually eat and allow the nutrition and the energy to return to your body. Similarly, in spiritual life, this is the process. But the hearing and chanting of Krishna's names is all purifying and all powerful, regardless of how people respond to it. Some people may be very like, wow, this is amazing. Some people may be not even into it, but that the effect is already happening to them. So this is something that's very important when you're approaching people, to just kind of see where they're at, because when you start to act like people do in in modern world and modern thinking, you just think like, if I can just logically out debate this person, they will switch to my side, which doesn't really work either that way either. But it's just even much more so for spiritual life. You have to approach people with kind of seeing where they're at, and look for those opportunities to be able to educate people. Because they sometimes, as Allen Ginsberg would say, that when a person becomes religious, they want to feed everyone. Well, I think we've all had this sort of story where we've had this really wonderful experience of chanting in a retreat, or just maybe initially when we start chanting, it's so overwhelming and wonderful that we think we have to tell everybody about it. We have to teach, we have to approach our parents about that. And there's this like, and then we're upset when they don't receive it, and it becomes this sort of fanatical thing, like, I'm going to prove, and then to them it appears like you're trying to, Bible thump people into, but it says in the Srimad Bhagavatam that da da da, people are like, what? Right? So there is a process by which you approach people, and understanding that people. And sometimes you may be surprised that people appear not receptive, but then they take right to it. So, text 36. Arjuna uvacha atakena prayuktoyam papam kalati purushaha anichan api varshnena shneya balad iva niyojita. Arjuna uvacha, Arjuna said, Ata, there hereafter, kena, by what, playukta, impelled, ayam, one, papam, sins, charati, acts, purushaha, a man, anichan, without desiring, api, although, varishneya, O descendant of Rishni, balat, by force, iva, as if, niyojitaha, engaged. So bala is also coming from Balaram, which means strength. So this is reference, balat is a reference by force, by power, right? Arjuna uvacha, sorry, I'm reading Sanskrit when looking at English, okay. Arjuna said, O descendant of Rishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? So this is, we're getting into the idea of lust, right? And what impels, what makes people do things when they know that they shouldn't be doing them, but they just can't help themselves. So here Arjuna, again, is, as a disciple, is asking very intelligent questions and giving Krishna the opportunity to clearly delineate the spiritual knowledge. Purport: a living entity as part and parcel of the Supreme is originally spiritual, pure and free from all material contamination. So that's a little bit, we have this idea of original sin in Christianity, that somehow Adam was created and he was spiritually pure, but then he was corrupted. And I guess that's sort of similar to the thing here, but this is a little bit different, is that the living entity eternally is spiritually pure, but is contaminated by coming into contact, by having the desire of what we're going to be talking about here, of lust, of desire, of wanting to control and enjoy things. comes under the influence of material nature and the modes of material nature, under the direction of Maya Devi. Therefore, by nature, he is not subjected to the sins of the material world, but when he is in contact with the material nature, he acts in many sinful ways without hesitation, and sometimes even against his will. As such, Arjuna's question to Krishna is very sanguine as to the perverted nature of the living entities. Although the living entity sometimes does not want to act in sin, he is still forced to act. Sinful actions are not, however, impelled by the supersoul within, but are due to another cause, as the Lord explains in the next verse. So that's important, very important to know that Krishna is not impelling this sinful reaction, this sinful desire. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, text 37. Kama esha kroda esha, rajaguno samud bhavaha, mahoshano mahapapam papmam ma, vidiyena iyavarinam. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, the personality of Godhead, said, Kamaha, lust, Ishaha, all these, Krodaha, wrath, Isha, all these, Rajoguna, the mode of passion, Samudbhavaha, born of, Mahashanaha, all devouring, Mahapapma, greatly sinful, Vidi, no, Enam, this, Iha, in the material world, Varinam, greatest enemy. Translation: the Blessed Lord said, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material modes of passion and later transformed into wrath, which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of the world. And so here we go again with this, which was brought up previously in text 2, which I'm going to find that really quickly. See if I can find it. Okay, where was it? Yeah, here we go. While contemplating the objects of senses, text 62, chapter 2. A person develops attachment for them, and such attachment lust develops, and from lust anger arises. From anger delusion arises, and from delusion bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost, and when intelligence is lost, one falls down again into the material pool. So that basically shows this idea of where lust comes from. It's this contemplation of the objects of the senses, contemplating upon enjoying and redirecting our tendency to focus our senses upon Krishna. We focus outward into the material world. We become attached to them. We want to control them. We become angry either by not getting them or being repulsed by them, or many other reasons. And this keeps us perpetually in the material world because of our bewilderment, of our being bewildered by the material energy. So here it is said, born in the contact of the modes of passion and later transformed into wrath. So, this is why the more sexy kind of like, the more sexual something is, the more violent that oftentimes those things are connected to. People who are very attached sexually are also extremely violent and abusive people. So this is an all-devouring sinful enemy of the world because it keeps people in constant fighting and anger, and whether this is also not just a sexual thing, but just a desire to control and enjoy things. Things are not going the way we want them to go, therefore we focus on them, and because we focus on them, we become angry, and this anger creates conflict, and so And this is the mode of passion. You can see it very a lot in this, what's going on in the world and social media and the political spectrum of, left or right, people getting angry, people getting violent against each other. It causes disharmony among people in the world, distrust, not, opposite of love, basically, hate. Purport: when a living entity comes into contact with the material creation, his eternal love for Krishna is transformed into lust, in association with the mode of passion. Or in other words, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust, as milk in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. Then again, when lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath, and wrath is transformed into illusion, and illusion continues the material existence. Therefore, lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity, and it is lust only which induces the pure living entity to remain entangled in the material world. And people spend their whole life trying to fight things. I was just watching this documentary by Adam Curtis about the history of Afghanistan, and just watching people interact over, power and glory and a vision of what they think is right, and of what they do because of this lust, this desire to control and enjoy things. Wrath is a manifestation of the mode of ignorance. These modes of passion, instead of being degraded into the modes of if therefore the modes of passion, instead of being degraded into the modes of ignorance, are elevated to the modes of goodness by the prescribed method of living and acting, then one can be saved from the degradation of wrath by spiritual attachment. So, if we can kind of put things into perspective, and we elevate ourselves into the mode of goodness, from the mode of goodness we can actually launch ourselves into Suddha Sattva, which is the transcendental mode of goodness. If we, by chanting Krishna's names, by focusing on the instructions of our spiritual master and applying those to the best of our means. So the mode of goodness is done through the rules and regulations and the Vedic system to keep a person in the mode of goodness, so that they're more likely to be able to engage in spiritual activities. It's very difficult to engage in spiritual activities in the mode of passion, and almost impossible in the mode of ignorance. Like living in a dark cloud. The Supreme Personality of God had expanded himself into many for his ever-increasing spiritual bliss, and the living entities are his parts and parcels of this spiritual bliss. They also have partial independence, but by misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. This material creation is created by the Lord to give a facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lusty propensities, and when they are completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities, the living entities begin to inquire about their real position. So the lustful, Krishna gives us the facilities to be able to engage in the lustful activities that we focus on, but they are not, they're actually torture devices, because they bring us into greater bafflement and unhappiness. This is what they eventually, as we see from this verse, what's exactly being described is where that heads to. Eventually, people come to a point where they're just completely unhappy, maybe even like on drugs, suicidal, and they come to the end of the road, and some people will kill themselves or take too many drugs because they feel like that's the only way out, is to kill yourself, to try to nullify, which of course we know doesn't work that way. But we have to come to a realization that we are not supposed to be in this position, where we take surrender to God, or we say, why Why am I suffering like this? And we start to inquire. People surrender to God. I've gone through this road, many a time. A lot of us have. The inquiry is the beginning of the Vedanta Sutras when it is said, Atato Brahma Jinasha. One should inquire into the Supreme. And the Supreme is defined in Srimad Bhagavatam as Janmad Yasha Yado Nyavad Italatascha, or the origin of everything is the Supreme Brahman. Therefore, the origin of lust is also in the Supreme. If therefore lust is transformed into love for the Supreme, or transformed into Krishna consciousness, or in other words, desiring everything for Krishna, then both lust and wrath can be spiritualized. So it's very important to know that this activity of engaging in lust is actually a perverted or converted natural tendency to love Krishna. So all we have to do is to purify that ability and those desires to allow the original means of loving God to come through. If therefore lust is transformed into love for the Supreme, or transformed into Krishna consciousness, or in other words, desiring everything for Krishna, then both lust and wrath can be spiritualized. Hanuman, the great servitor of Rama, Lord Rama, engaged his wrath upon his enemies for the satisfaction of the Lord. Therefore, lust and wrath, when they are employed in Krishna consciousness, become our friends instead of our enemies. Text 38. Dumena vridyate varnir yata darsho malena cha yatol bena vrito garbas tata tenedam avrityam dumena, by smoke, avriyate covered, vanihi fire, yata just as, adarshaha mirror, malena by dust, cha also, yata just as, ulbena by the womb, avritya is covered, garbaha embryo, tata so, tena by that lust, idam this avrityam is covered. Translation: as fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as an embryo is covered by the womb, similarly the living entity is covered by different degrees of this lust. So the greatest purifier of this is, of course, we've read in Lord Chaitanya's prayers, is the hearing and chanting of Krishna's names, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years together. And that lust, of course, is envy and desire to control for ourselves. So this is wonderful analogies. Smoke is, when a fire is set, the smoke immediately takes off, and you can, it's hard to actually see the original fire, right? Because of that fire. Or, if you leave a mirror sitting for 6 months, all this dust will accumulate. You can run your finger on it, see how much dust is there, right? You can't really see into the mirror. So there's just wonderful analogies here that was Krishna answering Arjuna about his question about what is impelled by sinful acts, even unwillingly, if engaged by force. And so he's explaining this idea of lust. Purport: there are 3 degrees of covering of the living entity by which his pure consciousness is obscured. This covering is but lust under different manifestations, like smoke in the fire, dust on the mirror, and the womb about the embryo. When lust is compared to smoke, it is understood that the fire of the living spark can be a little perceived. In other words, when the living entity exhibits his Krishna consciousness slightly, he may be likened to a fire covered by smoke. Although fire is necessary where there is smoke, there is no overt manifestation of fire in the early stage. This stage is like the beginning of Krishna consciousness. The dust on the mirror refers to a cleansing process of the mirror of the mind by so many spiritual methods. The best process is to chant the holy names of the Lord. The embryo is covered by the womb is an analogy illustrating a helpless position for the child in the womb is so helpless that he cannot even move. This stage of a living condition can be compared to that of the trees. The trees are also living entities, but they have been put into such a condition of life by such a great exhibition of lust that they are almost void of all consciousness. The covered mirror is compared to the birds and beasts, and the smoke-covered fire is compared to the human being. In the form of a human being, the living entity may revive a little Krishna consciousness, and if he makes further development, the fire of spiritual life can be kindled in the human form of life. By careful handling of the smoke in the fire, that fire can be made to blaze. Therefore, the human form of life is a chance for the living entity to escape the entanglement of material existence. In the human form of life, one can conquer the enemy lust by cultivation of Krishna consciousness under able guidance, under the guidance of the pure devotee of Krishna. And we'll probably have to end there. We'll read more about this lust next time and this verses. Very nice, very wonderful. Thank you very much. All right, well.